the energy and communication was really the area where students were challenged the most. And so all of the PLCs that we'll be doing this year will focus on challenge areas 2.3, 2.5, and 2.9. And so tonight we're really going to focus on 2.9. And so AP Insight really focuses on challenging content and skills, providing resources and tasks that are designed to improve students' knowledge and skills, as well as correct student misunderstandings so that they can be successful on the exam. And so the question that we're going to talk about throughout this evening is really, how do we use AP Insight in our classroom to achieve these goals? So tonight's PLC is really intended to answer the question, how do we use that AP Insight to achieve those goals? And so you'll see that we're really trying to anticipate those student struggles. We're going to focus on giving building block quizzes and how we respond to those quiz reports. And then we'll have continued ongoing question and answer in the chat box. So what I'd like you to do right now is read these 4 statements and just describe your progress by typing the appropriate letter in the chat box. And just remember, there is really no right or wrong answer. We're all beginning from somewhere. So I'll pause for just a couple seconds. We've got a few more people adding their thoughts. Oh, great, Wendy. Thanks for sharing that. Do you have a sense if your, Wendy, if your teachers were online tonight, about where they might be? Ah, okay. So it looks like we're all sort of at the lower end of the continuum, which is just fine because we're all in this together. And so I really appreciate you being here in this PLC, and this may give us some ideas about how to begin. I certainly totally understand that this is I think my 4th week of school, and yeah, that being able to catch your breath. And as long as it's good on your list, you know, we will make progress together. So we're going to start this evening by taking a look at a case study. And so I'm not going to read to you, but I hope you get the little joke, Mr. Sell, haha. And so I'll give you just a minute to read. And how about after you've finished, had a chance to read through the case study, maybe just raise your hand using that icon at the top of your screen. Great, thank you. And I am going to lower all your hands. There we go. And so Mr. Sell gave 2 questions. The questions that I'm going to show them one at a time on the PowerPoint slide, but they're also on the participant handout as well. So here was question 1. And so go ahead and think about how you would answer this question. And think about also what, and you don't need to answer in the chat box, you can just answer privately. Think about what this question is really trying to elicit from students. What are we trying to decide about student understanding with this question? And I'm going to move forward and show you the second question and give you a chance to read that and think about this question as well. Not only what the correct answer is, but really, again, what content and what skills is this question trying to elicit? And so now we're going to try a little experiment. I'm going to open up everyone's microphone and give you all microphone rights. What I'm going to ask, that'll be handy, is that if you have your microphone on and you're not talking, you can mute it yourself by clicking on the microphone button at the top. But what I'd like it to be, I think we'll have a much better conversation if we can all take turns actually speaking as opposed to typing in the chat box. And so the question that I'd like to raise to the group this evening is, what do you notice about both of these questions? And perhaps as you answer, maybe give us your first name and then let us know what you're seeing about these questions. And it's really quiet out there, so I don't know if you don't have microphone capability. If you don't, and you'd like to type your answer in the chat box, that would be great. So I'm going to pause for just a couple more minutes while you think about what you do notice about these questions. What do they have in common? Yeah, I agree with all answers, particularly the application. Two people said application, based on transfer of knowledge and deep understanding. Absolutely. You may have noticed also that they both involve models. In this case, not physical models, but models of, in the case of question 56, the one that we're looking at right now, we're looking at a model of a water solution of a sort of like a miniature ecosystem. And in the question before, we're really looking at models of molecules. Okay, and as you noted that both of these questions require content and skill to answer the question. In question 56, this last question, you'll notice that it's stimulus based, that there's a paragraph that students need to read in order to answer the question. Right? And just to confirm with everyone, the answer to the first question right here would be A, and the answer to this question is B. And before we go on, I'd like to welcome the second host that appeared in your screen, Elaine Silverstone, who works with College Board, and she handles any questions or issues that will come up. So if you have any questions, any issues with logging into AP Insight, or you have any questions, she is a wonderful and valuable resource. And so let's move forward. And so it's pretty clear from Mr. Sal's students' responses on these first two questions that his students are struggling with Challenge Area 2.9. And notice that it also corresponds with Learning Objective 2.9. Okay. And as a reminder, and you guys are all very experienced AP teachers, I know that you're aware that the basis of the exam questions on the AP exam are based on the learning objectives. And so each challenge area is associated with at least one science practice or one science skill. And so as students work through the course, you may discover that a student has a misconception or a misunderstanding that's related to the content, or it's related to a science practice. So for example, modeling. And so it's hard sometimes to discern, is the student's misunderstanding in the realm of content, or is it the student's misunderstanding in the realm of the science practice, the science skill? And so this is a question I'd want to pose to the group. You still have microphones if you'd care to speak, or feel free to type in the chat box. And if you can also send a private message as well if you'd prefer to remain anonymous, and then I can pose the question to the group. But I'm going to pause for just a minute so that you can type in your answers. What do your students typically struggle with in this Challenge Area 2.9, which really centers around representing graphically or modeling quantitatively the exchange of molecules between an organism and its environment, and the subsequent use of these molecules to build new molecules that facilitate dynamic homeostasis, growth, and reproduction? Do they struggle with content, the learning objectives, skills, all of the above? And so I'll pause to collect your answers. Nick, I totally agree. Yeah, using knowledge that they know and putting it into new situations. The quantitative portion, yeah, these are all awesome answers. And I think that we'll probably all agree that this is where our students are. So a few more people are still typing in some responses. And as they do, one of the questions that I always wonder about is why? Why are my students struggling with this content area? And what are the misunderstandings that might underlie those struggles? Content, content, content. Oh, so true. Mm, right. So much structure getting taught all at the same time that it's easy to confuse them. Yes, definitely the application. So as we think about Mr. Cell, Mr. Cell's been busy teaching some content around macromolecules and their monomers and their polymers and how they work together and are used by living organisms and built up and returned. And so Mr. Cell's struggles, his student struggles actually, not his, can really be assessed by using a building block quiz. And so hopefully keep this window open, but perhaps in another window, if you open AP Insight, if you open the guide to the challenge area, which is under the Prepare tab, and if you look at the building blocks for this area, and you can see that if you look at the Prepare, so you're under 2.9, under the Prepare tab, you're going to click on this guide to the challenge area. And think about how the building blocks relate to this challenge area. And again, if you're having any issues with logging into the AP Insight, if you just go ahead and type and let us know your struggles. I know that Elaine is a master at fixing any issues. So just so I have a sense of where you are, if you would use the raise your hand icon and let me know when you've been able to find the guide to the challenge area 2.9 and can take a look at that. And so we have just about everybody who's able to see that guide. And as you're looking at that and thinking about how the building blocks relate to that challenge area, what I want to remind you is that those building blocks are the concepts. And they're the concepts that students need to know in order to really deeply understand a challenge area. And the other really, really important piece is that the challenge areas and the building blocks are tightly, tightly aligned to the curriculum frameworks, the AP curriculum frameworks, and that they address specific learning objectives. So these are not add-ons. These are actually the integral key parts of the AP framework. And the AP instructors and the College Board folks who actually developed this program really looked and analyzed lots of data and student understanding about which parts of the framework students are really struggling in the most. And so what we're going to take a look at now is that as Mr. Sell looked at those questions, Mr. Sells decided at this point in his curriculum that he really wants to focus on building block A. And so if we review that, as we review that concept, it's really that it's about structure and function. And so that students can describe both the structure and the subunits of these macromolecules in order to determine their functions. And then not only that, they can go further and explain how those organic molecules are assembled by dehydration synthesis and then subsequently broken down by hydrolysis. And so I'd like to open up again, and we can use the chat box. That seems to be working for everybody rather than the microphones. So I'm going to open the chat box again and open it for discussion. Do you have any questions? And I know that you're all super experienced AP biology teachers. And so if you think about struggles you've had, not necessarily personally with the content, but perhaps struggles with teaching the content. And so you can either ask with your microphone or type in the chat screen. And I'll pause for a few minutes to let that conversation begin. Mm, I agree, Andy. using models, physical models, letting them see and manipulate the compounds is hugely powerful. Using data to explain a model is also very difficult. This is true. Models can be really expensive in creating them. And so that might be a great thing with the wealth of experiences. If any of you have had experience coming up with easy to make or inexpensive models of molecules, that would be a great thing to share. And so we're going to continue on, though, now with our case study. And so Mr. Sell's been teaching the building block concepts, and now he decides to give them the building block quiz. And note that you can find the building block quiz. You don't have to bring it up right now, but just notice that this is where you would find the building block quiz under the Prepare tab. Okay. And so if we look at that building block quiz, what we're going to do right now is just take a few minutes to answer those building block quiz questions. There's 4 of them. And know that I'm not testing your content knowledge here, but rather what I'd like you to do is think about the questions through the lens of a student. What are these questions asking students to do? And which student struggles might be addressed by this particular building block quiz? And so I know that most of you at the beginning were able to download the PLC handout for this evening. And so what I'm going to do is move through, just in case you haven't, I'm going to click through the 4 questions at about 1 minute and 20 seconds, which is the standard allotted time average for the multiple choice questions on the AP exam. And so, and that way people, if you don't have your handout, you can take a look at them on the screen. Otherwise, take a look at them, and then I'll ask you to raise your hand when you've finished, in case you have answered these questions far quicker than an AP biology student would do. And so here are the first 2 questions. So I'll leave those up for about 2, almost 3 minutes, and then I'll move on to questions 3 and 4. And again, go ahead and just raise your hand when you've finished the 4 questions. Oops. Great. It looks like everybody got finished, and so if you want to check your answers, um, answer number 1 was B. Answer number 2 is also B. 3 is also B. But just to mix things up a little bit, question 4 is A. And so if we think about this, about thinking about you took those questions through the lens of a student, what are these questions asking students to know and be able to do? And which student struggles are addressed by this building block quiz? And so some of the things that appear are that some of the key points in these 4 questions are that they're really asking, again, students to use a model to identify which atoms are found in which macromolecules. As other people mentioned, again, that students struggle with is analyzing data in order to classify a macromolecule based on its composition. Again, using a model in order to differentiate between dehydration synthesis and hydrolysis, and analyzing data to determine the effects of saliva on simple versus complex carbohydrates. And so those are just a few of the struggles that might be addressed by this building block quiz, and some of the things that students would need to know and be able to do to be successful. And so even though Challenge Area 2.9, the Learning Objective 4.2, is a building block of understanding, and so you would expect that it just means that the big ideas are not standalone entities. And there's been a lot of conversation on the AP community about, do we teach Big Idea 1 by itself and then teach Big Idea 2, Big Idea 3, Big Idea 4? And while it's certainly able to do so, it wasn't necessarily intended to be taught, those big ideas to be taught as standalone units. And so these building block quiz questions let us check student understanding of content and skill because they require the use of skill, those science practices, as well as content, just like the AP exam. And so you can see the science practices are highlighted there on the alignment to the exam. And as a reminder, remember that each learning objective links content with a science practice. And so there's always a science practice action verb embedded in each learning objective, and those become the basis for the exam itself. So the building block quizzes then, they can really guide our planning and teaching to ensure that we have given students opportunities to learn and develop the necessary skills and knowledge. And so all of these questions, those questions 1 through 4, required modeling, which are the science practices that are associated with this particular learning objective. And so Mr. Sell has given this quiz, and one of the most awesome things, besides getting kids to practice those questions themselves, is you get a really nice sample report that might look something like this. And so if we look at Mr. Sell's sample report, what you can see is that 3 of his students, he has a very small class, I don't know how he managed to do that, 3 of his students scored 4 out of 4 on a quiz. So clearly these students have demonstrated understanding of the building block. 4 of the students got a 3. They demonstrate some understanding, but there's still some gaps that probably remain. The other 3 of his students scored only 2 out of 4, and so demonstrated some limited understanding and probably need some additional support in order to fully grasp this building block. And so overall, there are some student misunderstandings that Mr. Sell is going to need to address at some point. And so, how do these quiz reports tell us about student progress? And so, based on his student scores, what should Mr. Sell do to target further instruction? And so, I'm curious because there's a wealth of resources and experience in the room. If those were Mr. Sell's scores, 3 kids got a 4 out of 4, 4 kids got a 3 out of 4, and 3 kids got a 2 out of 4. What would you suggest that Mr. Sell do next? And I'll pause to give you some space to type in the chat box. What should Mr. Sell do? I really like Nick's idea of flexible grouping for remediating or enhancing. What kinds of things would you do, Nick, to enhance for those students that had gotten a 4 out of 4? I love the idea of having them do essays or helping them assist other students. That's a really good point, Don. Yeah, some targeted review for those lower students. And so one of the awesome things, though, is that AP Insight also provides some next steps guide. And so if you have in your other window, if you have your AP Insight open, you can open the next steps guide. And so if you look under the ACT tab still in challenge area 2.9, you can see that there is both a next steps teacher's guide and a next step student guide. And take a look at those for just a couple of minutes and think about how those might be used to further inform your instruction. So one of the things I love about the Next Step Guide, particularly for the students, and you have to guide them through it a little bit at the beginning, but then students really love this, is this idea of metacognition and kids really getting a handle on knowing what they do know as well as knowing what they don't know. And that is so empowering for them, thinking that particularly when they go on to large universities or colleges, in their future life, just having a handle on, wow, what do I need to do next? Where do I go from here? And that learning about learning can be really powerful. And so at this point, depending upon where you are in your year, hopefully, you'll be able to identify one building block quiz from this challenge area that you can use with students in your upcoming unit. And so what I'm going to do is pause and give you about, I don't know, maybe about 8 minutes or so for you to use either your challenge area roadmap or your course syllabus. You've logged into AP Insight, and think for a little bit, take a look at the building block quizzes, and think about when you might use one of those building block quizzes from this particular challenge area in an upcoming unit. And then when you're done, I'll have you raise your hand again so that I know that you've completed the task. And then in the chat window, if you would be so kind as to just type in which building block quiz you think you might use next. And so I'll touch base with you in about 8 minutes. And so I think that most people have had an opportunity to look at those building block quizzes and decide on where they might fit next in your curriculum. The other thing that I just want to mention to you is that if we look back, I'm going to see if I can pop back to some of the slides. Let's see. Right here in this slide, if you look that we looked at where you could assign a building block quiz. Directly above that, it says 2.9 success criteria and misunderstandings. If you don't need to open it up right now, but that's actually one of my most favorite things because it's basically a table, and in the first column, it shows you success criteria for that building block. And for building block A, there are 2 success criteria. One about identifying the elements essential to life processes and biosynthesis, and then also representing the combination of components into polymers and then breaking them back down into monomers. But the second column is my absolute favorite, and it lists common misunderstandings. And it talks about where students might potentially struggle. And so it's always really handy to sort of get other people's viewpoint on how students might be struggling and anticipating what their misconceptions actually are. So I would encourage you to take a look at that as well as you're looking at these challenge areas, because that's a super handy reference. And so we've talked a little bit about some strategies already that we might use to build up to a building block quiz, and thinking about how we might go forward with that. Okay, but we also need to think about not only where we want our students to go, but we also need to think about how we might get our students there, and thinking about the learning opportunities that we can provide to students, and making sure that our teaching aligns with the framework and assessments, and then providing students those enough opportunity to build content, knowledge, and skills. And we all have different situations, but I know that I personally am always struggling to balance time for activities, time for content, time to allow students to just grapple and get in, time for students to self-reflect. But the performance tasks themselves really give students an opportunity to practice and build their ability in that targeted science practice. And so performance tasks are provided for every single building block and every single challenge area. And so all of this information can be found under the Teach tab. And so it can inform further instruction. And so these performance tasks are assessments for learning, which can be used as formative assessments, and that's really their most appropriate use rather than summative assessments. And they're assessments that help build student understanding. They give the students some feedback in terms of where they are in their understanding, but they also give you some really powerful insights as well. And several people had mentioned that students struggle with applying the content, and that's exactly what these performance tasks are designed to do. And really, at the end of the day, they're tools for students to monitor their own progress. And so as we think about this question, in what ways is the performance task aligned to the curriculum framework and the science practices? And then how does it support student development of content and knowledge? Okay, just know that the performance tasks are very tightly aligned with the identified content and skills for that building block, as well as the building block quiz. And as you go through, I know that most of you haven't had much time yet to actually go through and really explore the site. But when you look at the performance tasks, especially for those of you who are veteran teachers, many of you will recognize that a lot of these are variations on things that you probably already do in your classroom anyway. But the performance tasks, it's good to know that they're really developed in a specific sequence, and they move from knowledge and skill acquisition, sort of getting students' hands around that knowledge and practicing those skills at the onset, And then the further performance tasks are really about applying the skills and knowledge that they've acquired. And there's lots of checks for understanding built in along the way with that. And so what I'd like to do right now is give you an opportunity to take a look at the performance tasks for Challenge Area 2.9. And again, look at your syllabus, your roadmap, and think about and take a look at some of those performance tasks and think about where you might place them in your curriculum. And I'll give you about 7 or 8 minutes again. If you finish before, go ahead and raise your hand, and that way I won't hold you up. So I'll give you about 8 minutes to use the AP Insight platform, take a look at those performance tasks, and think about where you might plug them into your syllabus. So lots of people had to leave. So for those of you that are left, I think we'll just move forward. And just so that you get a sense of overview, it looks like a lot of people thought it was just an hour. So we'll carry on quickly and let the rest of you go as well. And so all of this is building towards a challenge area assessment. So once we get to the end of the challenge area, the assessment is actually like a free response question that mirror those on the AP exam. And so using models, understanding macromolecules, and so the building blocks build on each other to accomplish this overall understanding of a particular challenge area, and that students need to be able to apply the content knowledge and skills across multiple topics and domain. And so these challenge areas assessments assess the same content and skills as the building block quizzes. And so I'm going to skip to the next one. And so don't forget that you can always look at the Share What Works on the AP Insight website and keep the conversation going. And that is a super powerful option. And so remember that you have the links. And if you're still here, it would be awesome if you would take the survey of letting me know how this went tonight. So Gail, hopefully you're able to get that link down. I'll stay here for a few more minutes if you have any questions. Perfect. Thanks so much, Gail, and have a great night. And Audra just came in the room, so I'm going to open up everybody's microphone again, so Audra can chat as well. Are you there, Audra? So Audra, I'm assuming that you can hear me okay. I wasn't hearing anything back on your end. Just so you know, you can sort of see in the chat comments if you scroll up. Everybody thought that the webinar was only an hour. And so about 4 minutes ago, like everybody signed off, and only Gail, I think, took the quiz, which was sort of a bummer. There were only 6 people total. Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. So it was actually really supposed to be an hour and a half, though, even though it was advertised for just an hour. Oh, phew. I thought maybe I had screwed up. And so, okay, that makes sense. Um, but when I do scroll up, they seemed like they really liked it. All of them rated themselves a C and a D, like they had just been way too busy and it wasn't anything getting in the way. They were just, you know, they were just too busy to look at it. But they were all super, super, super positive about what was on the AP Insight. So, and I think the case study was incredible. And so that was a really beautiful thing. So super props as well. Yeah, rock on, Mr. Sell. Um, Yeah, and actually, Jim sent me an email that he was picking up his car and walking home, so I told him I would give him a call after I was done with this webinar as well. Um, None of the participants um, either had or were willing to use the microphone. Under the audio tab, I opened it up to everyone. One person did, I did hear some background noise, and um, he muted his microphone. But so everybody just preferred to use the chat room. And I think it was sort of like pulling teeth a little bit to get them to chat. I think they just want to sit and listen. Um, People were nice, and 3 of the 6 participants actually typed things in, sort of because I think they felt like they had to. A couple of them weren't very good typers, and it was really painful for them, you could tell. And then a couple of the people, one gal, it was Wendy Watson, was a AP coordinator. And so she didn't feel like she really wanted to contribute because she was just trying to get her AP teachers on board. So she didn't really feel very comfortable with the content or typing in, answers as well. So, oh, okay. That's interesting. Okay. So that's actually good feedback for me. So when I click on the audio and give microphone rights to participants, then I need to tell them to reconnect their audio and reconnect their microphone. Okay. That was a rookie mistake on my part because I've only ever done the welcome webinar, and that really, they really weren't encouraged to share the microphones during that one. So that may be good advice to just share with other people. Hmm. So let's see. My choices are microphone rights for participants, and I see that you've got a microphone. Um, what happens if I'm going to make you a host too. What happens if I do that? Can you can you talk now? Hmm. Oh, I'm not hearing anything. That's weird. Elaine came on earlier too, and she didn't say anything either. Yeah, I do think overall it went well, and I think that it was even though they weren't super familiar with it, I think it was a great way to sort of get them thinking about how to incorporate it in their class. And I think one of the strong things, I don't know, I guess the one thing I wonder about, and I don't really have a good answer for this, but I'm going to think more about it, and I promise that I will get back to you. After they take the building block quiz, they used the roadmap to think about what their next building block quiz would be. And then there's a second time when they're incorporating the performance task. I think having both of those times to think about it were useful, particularly for the people that don't have a lot of experience. But, that's about the time when everybody's signed off. So I'm sort of wondering, okay, maybe it was just the 1 hour gig that, people were confused, or I wonder if that second time was too much. I guess my gut says no, because this group was very inexperienced. So that might be my only I wonder. And then the only other comment that I might make would be, I don't know, I'm assuming that all of the facilitators would have had a fair amount of experience doing webinars, but maybe reminding people in the teacher notes to ask participants to raise their hand when they finished, like finishing the quiz questions, finishing, identifying their building block. That might be a thing to remind people in the facilitator notes, because that's super handy to know where they are. But no, this one was awesome, and I love what you did with the case study and the conversation, so I'm just super stoked that you're writing these. That's awesome. So that's all I've got. I'll forward. I'll copy you on the participant list that I send to Ivana as well. Perfect. Well, have a good night, dear, and we'll be in touch soon. Take care.